They threw me out like common trash. These elite country club members made sure everyone knew a woman like me had no business breathing their rarefied air. But what they didn't know was that I owned half the buildings they called home and was about to remind them exactly who held the real power in this city. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Delilah Monroe, and this is the story of how I went from being humiliated in front of 200 of the city's most powerful people to showing them that sometimes the person you underestimate the most is the one who controls your entire world. 5 years ago, I thought I understood how the world worked. I believed that if you were kind, hardworking, and genuine, people would see your worth and treat you accordingly. I thought respect was something you earned through character and integrity, not something you bought with designer clothes and inherited surnames. I was so beautifully, devastatingly naive. I grew up in the Riverside district, where my grandmother owned a small flower shop that had been in our family for 40 years. The shop sat on the corner of Elm and 3rd Street, its windows always bursting with colorful arrangements that brought joy to our working-class neighborhood. Every morning before school, I would help Grandmother Rosalie arrange the daily displays, learning not just about flowers but about treating every customer with dignity regardless of how much money they spent. Our apartment above the shop was small but filled with laughter, the aroma of Grandmother's famous lavender tea, and the sound of her telling stories about the old days when our neighborhood was the heart of the city. She taught me that wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts but in the richness of your relationships and the integrity of your character. She showed me how to see beauty in simple things and how to find strength in adversity. Those lessons shaped everything about who I became. When other kids in school made fun of my secondhand clothes or the fact that I smelled like flowers instead of expensive perfume, Grandmother would remind me that true elegance came from within. When I struggled with homework because I was working in the shop after school, she would sit with me at the kitchen table helping me study by lamplight, telling me that education was the one thing no one could ever take away from me. By the time I graduated high school, I had learned more about business, customer service, and human nature than most people learn in a lifetime. I understood how to read people's needs, how to solve problems creatively, and how to turn a small profit into something larger through careful planning and relentless work ethic. Most importantly, I learned that everyone deserves to be treated with kindness, from the wealthy woman buying roses for her dinner party to the elderly man who could only afford a single carnation for his late wife's grave. When I turned 21, Grandmother became seriously ill. The medical bills were crushing our small family finances, and I knew I needed to do something dramatic to save both her life and our beloved flower shop. That's when I made the decision that would change everything about my future, though I had no idea at the time just how dramatically it would reshape my entire existence. I had always been fascinated by real estate, spending my free time walking through different neighborhoods, studying which areas were improving and which ones were declining. I noticed patterns that others missed, saw potential where others saw problems. There was something about understanding the bones of a city, the way neighborhoods flowed and changed, that spoke to something deep in my soul. Using the flower shop as collateral and every penny I had saved since childhood, I bought my first property, a rundown duplex in what everyone considered the worst part of town. The building was a disaster, with broken windows, outdated plumbing, and a roof that leaked in 3 different places. Everyone, including the bank officers who approved my loan, thought I was making a terrible mistake. But I saw something they didn't. I saw that the city was slowly expanding eastward, that new businesses were starting to look for affordable spaces in areas with character and potential. I saw that young professionals were tired of paying enormous rents for tiny apartments in the fashionable districts, and were ready to consider neighborhoods that offered more space and authentic community feel. I spent every spare moment working on that duplex. I learned plumbing from YouTube videos, taught myself basic electrical work, and discovered I had a natural talent for seeing how spaces could be transformed. I haunted salvage yards and estate sales, finding beautiful fixtures and materials that other people had discarded. Slowly, painstakingly, I turned that broken-down building into something beautiful. When I finished the renovation and put the duplex on the rental market, I had 3 qualified applicants within a week. The rental income was enough to cover my loan payments and provide a small profit that I immediately reinvested into my next property. Within 6 months, I had bought 2 more buildings in the same neighborhood. The pattern continued for the next 4 years. I would identify undervalued properties in areas I believed had potential, buy them with creative financing, renovate them myself or with the help of skilled contractors I had befriended, and then either rent them out or sell them for a profit that I would reinvest into larger and better properties. My secret was that I actually listened to people. I talked to local business owners, community leaders, city planners, and longtime residents. I understood that real estate wasn't just about buildings. It was about community, about understanding what people needed and wanted in their daily lives. While other investors looked at spreadsheets and market reports, I walked the streets and had conversations with the people who actually lived and worked in these neighborhoods. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. By my 25th birthday, I owned 17 properties across 4 different neighborhoods. Some were residential buildings that I rented to families and young professionals. Others were commercial spaces that housed small businesses, restaurants, and artist studios. I had become, without really realizing it, a significant property owner in our mid-sized city. But success in real estate was just the beginning of my education in how the world really worked. As my portfolio grew, I started encountering people from the established business community, the ones who had inherited their wealth and considered themselves the natural leaders of our city. These were the families whose names were on buildings downtown, whose ancestors had founded the major businesses that still dominated our local economy. At first, these encounters were professional. I would meet them at city planning meetings, business association events, or chamber of commerce gatherings. They were polite enough in these settings, though I could always sense their curiosity about this young woman who seemed to be buying up properties all over town. They clearly couldn't figure out where I fit in their understanding of how things were supposed to work. The turning point came when I started dating James Worthington, a man I met at a historic preservation fundraiser. James was different from anyone I had ever known, raised in the kind of old money family that most people in our city treated with automatic deference. His family had made their fortune in manufacturing 3 generations ago, and they had spent decades building their reputation as the arbiters of taste and social acceptability in our community. James seemed genuinely interested in my work, asking thoughtful questions about my real estate investments and appearing impressed by my success. He was charming, well-educated, and had the kind of effortless confidence that comes from never having to worry about money or social acceptance. When he asked me to attend social events with him, I thought it was because he valued my company and wanted to share his world with someone he cared about. I was so completely wrong about everything. The Worthington family lived in Candlewood Heights, an exclusive neighborhood where every house looked like something from a magazine, and every lawn was maintained by professional landscaping services. Their home was a sprawling colonial mansion that had been in the family for 60 years, filled with antique furniture, original oil paintings, and the kind of casual luxury that only comes from generations of wealth. James's mother, Evelyn Worthington, was the undisputed queen of our city's social scene. She served on the boards of every important charity, organized the most sought-after social events, and had the power to make or break someone's social standing with a single raised eyebrow. She was elegant, sophisticated, and had perfected the art of making someone feel small while appearing to be graciously welcoming. From the moment James brought me home to meet his family, I could feel Evelyn's displeasure radiating like heat from a furnace. She never said anything directly critical, of course. Instead, she would ask questions that seemed innocent but were designed to highlight the differences between my background and theirs. She would inquire about my family's history, my education, my hobbies, always with the tone that suggested she already knew the answers wouldn't be quite adequate. James's sister Caroline was even more direct in her disapproval. She had inherited her mother's sharp tongue but none of her subtlety, making comments about my clothes, my accent, and my lack of familiarity with their social customs. She would invite me to join her and her friends for activities that were designed to make me feel out of place, like wine tastings where she would discuss vintages I had never heard of, or shopping trips to boutiques where a single dress cost more than most people's monthly rent. But the real test of my place in their world came with the annual Midsummer Gala at Pinehurst Country Club, the most exclusive social event in our city's calendar. This wasn't just a party. It was a statement about who belonged in the upper echelons of our community and who didn't. The guest list was carefully curated, the dress code was strict, and every detail was designed to reinforce the social hierarchy that families like the Worthingtons had spent generations establishing. James had been talking about the gala for weeks, describing it as the event where I would finally be officially welcomed into his social circle. He helped me choose an appropriate dress, coached me on the names and backgrounds of the people I would meet, and assured me that once his mother's friends got to know me, they would see what he saw in me. I spent weeks preparing for that night. I had my hair done professionally, practiced small talk topics that would be appropriate for the social set I was entering, and even took a crash course in wine appreciation so I wouldn't embarrass myself during dinner conversation. I bought a dress that was elegant but not too flashy, expensive enough to show respect for the occasion but not so expensive that it would seem like I was trying too hard. When the night finally arrived, I felt more nervous than I had ever felt in my life. This wasn't just about impressing James's family anymore. This was about whether I would be accepted into the social world that controlled so much of the business and cultural life in our city. I knew that my real estate success had made me financially independent, but I was beginning to understand that money alone wouldn't guarantee social acceptance. The Pinehurst Country Club was everything I had imagined and more. Set on 200 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, the clubhouse looked like something from a different era. All stone columns and crystal chandeliers and rooms filled with leather-bound books and oil portraits of distinguished-looking men from decades past. The members moved through these spaces like they owned them, which of course they did, speaking in the kind of quiet, confident tones that come from never having to prove your right to be anywhere. The evening started well enough. James introduced me to several couples, and the conversations were pleasant, if somewhat superficial. I found myself discussing topics I had researched, nodding along with discussions about charity work and community involvement, trying to find my place in conversations about people and events I knew only secondhand. But as the evening progressed, I began to notice subtle changes in how people were treating me. Conversations would pause when I approached groups of women, then resume in slightly different tones. Men would smile politely when James introduced me, but their attention would quickly drift to other topics. I started to feel like I was performing in a play where everyone else knew the script except me. The real trouble started during dinner, when Evelyn stood up to make her traditional speech welcoming everyone to the gala. She spoke about the importance of tradition, about maintaining the standards that made Pinehurst special, about the responsibility that came with membership in such an exclusive community. Her words were carefully chosen, but I could feel them building towards something, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Then she looked directly at me. "Ladies and gentlemen," Evelyn continued, her voice carrying that particular tone of authority that comes from decades of social dominance. "As many of you know, Pinehurst has always maintained certain standards of membership. We believe that exclusivity isn't just about financial capability, but about understanding and respecting the traditions that make our community special." The room had grown quieter, and I could feel dozens of eyes turning toward our table. James shifted uncomfortably beside me, his hand reaching for his wineglass with slightly more urgency than the conversation seemed to warrant. Something cold was settling in my stomach, a growing awareness that this speech wasn't the general welcome I had initially assumed. "Recently," Evelyn continued, her gaze finding mine across the crowded dining room, "we've had some concerns about individuals who may not fully appreciate what Pinehurst represents. People who perhaps don't understand that membership here is about more than simply having the financial means to pay dues." The meaning was becoming crystal clear, and the humiliation was building like pressure behind a dam. I could see Carolyn smirking slightly, could feel the attention of everyone in the room focusing on me, like a spotlight I desperately wanted to escape. James was staring at his plate, his face flushed with embarrassment, but not the kind that comes from defending someone you love. "Therefore," Evelyn announced, her voice growing stronger and more confident, "the membership committee has decided to review certain recent applications and recommendations. We believe it's important to ensure that everyone who joins our community truly belongs here." The words hit me like physical blows. She wasn't just questioning my membership application, she was doing it publicly, in front of 200 of the most influential people in the city. This wasn't criticism delivered privately, or concerns expressed tactfully. This was a deliberate, calculated humiliation designed to put me in my place and show everyone else what happened when someone tried to rise above their designated station. I looked to James desperately, hoping he would stand up, say something, defend me, or at least show some sign that he disagreed with what his mother was doing. But he sat there in silence, his face pale, and his hands clenched in his lap, looking like a man watching a car accident he was powerless to prevent. The worst part was the faces around me. Some people looked uncomfortable, clearly recognizing that what was happening was cruel and unnecessary. But others, particularly the women who formed the core of Evelyn's social circle, looked satisfied, like they were watching justice being served. They had never accepted my presence in their world, and now they were watching me be formally expelled from it. "Ms. Monroe," Evelyn said, addressing me directly for the first time all evening, "I think it would be best if you left. The club's security will escort you out." The dining room was completely silent now, 200 people holding their breath, watching to see how I would respond to this public evisceration. I could feel my cheeks burning with shame and anger, could feel tears threatening to spill over, despite my desperate attempts to maintain some dignity in this moment of complete social destruction. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking slightly, but my voice somehow steady when I finally spoke. "I understand," I said quietly, looking directly at Evelyn. "Thank you for making your position so clear." I didn't look at James as I turned to leave. I couldn't bear to see whatever expression was on his face. Whether it was relief that the awkwardness was over, or shame that he hadn't defended me, either option would have broken my heart completely, and I needed to hold myself together long enough to make it out of that room with whatever dignity I had left. The security guard who escorted me through the club was professional but kind, clearly uncomfortable with the situation he had been put in. "Ma'am," he said quietly as we walked through the marble-floored lobby, "I want you to know that what happened in there wasn't right. You handled yourself with class." His words were a small comfort in an ocean of humiliation, but they meant more to me than he could have known. At least one person in that entire building recognized that what had just happened was wrong, that I had been treated unfairly regardless of whatever social rules I might have unknowingly violated. The parking lot was cold and dark, and I stood beside James's car for several minutes trying to process what had just happened. I had no way to get home since James had driven us there together, but more than that, I was trying to understand how I had misjudged everything so completely. How had I been so naive about what these people really thought of me? How had I convinced myself that financial success would be enough to gain their acceptance? That's when I noticed him sitting in a silver Mercedes sedan parked 2 spaces away from where I was standing. He was an older man, probably in his 60s, with distinguished gray hair, and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from real power rather than inherited position. Unlike everyone else at the gala, he wasn't wearing the flashy jewelry or obviously expensive accessories that marked most of the attendees. His elegance was understated, refined in a way that didn't need to announce itself. What struck me most was that he was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen all evening: respect. Not pity, not curiosity, not the uncomfortable sympathy of someone watching a social train wreck. He was looking at me like someone who recognized strength when he saw it, even in a moment of apparent defeat. He rolled down his window and spoke in a voice that was warm but carried an undertone of steel. "Excuse me, miss. I witnessed what happened in there, and I wanted to say that it was absolutely disgraceful. Would you like a ride somewhere?" I hesitated for a moment, not sure if accepting help from a stranger was wise, but something about his manner put me at ease. "Thank you," I said, "but I should probably wait for James." The man's expression grew thoughtful. I'm not sure that young man is coming out anytime soon. From what I observed, he seemed more concerned with managing his family's reaction than with taking care of you. His words stung because they were true. Even in my humiliation, I had been hoping that James would follow me outside, that he would choose me over his family's approval, that he would show some sign that our relationship meant more to him than social convenience. "My name is Theodore Blackstone," the man continued, "and I can promise you that my offer of a ride comes with no expectations other than making sure you get home safely. What happened to you tonight was unconscionable, and no one should have to stand alone in a parking lot after being treated so poorly." Something about the name Blackstone rang a bell, though I couldn't immediately place where I had heard it. "I'm Delilah Monroe," I said, accepting his offer and getting into the passenger seat of his immaculately maintained Mercedes. As we drove through the quiet streets toward my apartment, Theodore asked me thoughtful questions about my work, my background, and my goals. Unlike the interrogation I had endured from Evelyn and her circle, his questions came from genuine curiosity and interest. He listened carefully to my answers, asking follow-up questions that showed he understood both the business aspects of real estate development and the personal courage it took to build something from nothing. "You know," he said as we stopped at a red light, "I've been watching the development in the Riverside district with great interest. Someone has been doing remarkable work there, transforming buildings that most people had written off as worthless into beautiful, functional spaces. The vision required for that kind of work is rare." I looked at him with surprise. "You know about my properties?" Theodore smiled, and I caught a glimpse of something sharp and calculating behind his grandfatherly appearance. "Ms. Monroe, I make it my business to know about anyone who's making significant improvements to our city. What you've accomplished in 4 years is impressive, not just because of the financial success, but because of the way you've maintained the character of those neighborhoods while making them better." We talked for the rest of the drive about urban development, community building, and the responsibility that comes with owning property in areas where your decisions affect other people's lives. By the time we reached my apartment building, I felt like I had learned more about business philosophy in 30 minutes than I had in months of networking events and Chamber of Commerce meetings. As I got out of the car, Theodore handed me his business card. "I'd like to continue this conversation sometime soon," he said. "I have a feeling we might have some interests in common." I looked at the card and felt my breath catch. Theodore Blackstone, CEO of Blackstone Holdings. I knew that name because Blackstone Holdings owned some of the most significant commercial properties in our city and 3 neighboring cities. They were the kind of company that bought entire city blocks, that influenced city planning decisions, that had the power to reshape urban landscapes. "I don't understand," I said, staring at the card. "Why would someone like you be interested in talking to someone like me?" Theodore's expression grew serious. "Ms. Monroe, I think you're laboring under some misconceptions about your own significance. You may not realize it yet, but you're not the small-time investor those people in there tonight think you are. You're a player in this market, and it's time you started thinking like one." Over the following weeks, Theodore and I began meeting regularly for coffee, then lunch, then longer business discussions that stretched into the evening. What I learned from him changed everything about how I understood both my own position in the city's business community and the broader dynamics of power and influence. Theodore had built his empire through the same kind of careful observation and strategic thinking that had guided my smaller-scale investments. He understood that real estate was about more than buying and selling buildings. It was about understanding communities, anticipating changes, and positioning yourself to benefit from trends that others hadn't recognized yet. More importantly, he taught me to see the bigger picture of what I had already accomplished. While I had been focused on individual properties and immediate profits, he helped me understand that I had accidentally created something much more significant. A portfolio of properties that gave me substantial influence over the development and character of several key neighborhoods. "Delilah," he said during one of our conversations, "you own 17 properties across 4 neighborhoods. That's not just a real estate portfolio, that's a power base. You have the ability to influence zoning decisions, to attract or discourage certain types of businesses, to shape how entire areas of this city develop over the next decade." The revelation was startling. I had been thinking of myself as a small business owner who had gotten lucky with some good investments, but Theodore was showing me that I had actually positioned myself as a significant stakeholder in the city's future development. "The people who humiliated you at Pinehurst," Theodore continued, "they're operating from an outdated playbook. They think power comes from inherited money and social connections. But real power in modern cities comes from understanding markets, from being positioned to benefit from change, from having the vision to see opportunities that others miss." He was right, and as I began to understand the true scope of what I had built, I felt something shifting inside me. The shame and humiliation from that night at Pinehurst were transforming into something else. Determination, not just to prove those people wrong, but to show them that their understanding of how power worked in our city was fundamentally flawed. Theodore introduced me to other investors, city planners, and business leaders who operated in circles far more sophisticated than the social scene I had been trying to penetrate. These were people who measured success in terms of actual accomplishment rather than social acceptance, who respected results rather than pedigree. Working with Theodore's guidance, I began to see new possibilities for my existing properties and to identify opportunities for expansion that I had never considered. He taught me about leverage, about using the equity in my current properties to finance larger and more ambitious projects. He showed me how to read city planning documents, how to anticipate infrastructure improvements, how to position myself for maximum benefit from municipal development decisions. Most importantly, he helped me understand that the rejection I had experienced at Pinehurst wasn't a judgment on my worth as a person or even as a business professional. It was simply the reaction of people who felt threatened by change, who were so invested in maintaining their traditional sources of power that they couldn't recognize new forms of success when they encountered them. The Worthington family, Theodore told me one afternoon as we reviewed plans for a new property acquisition. They're what we call old money poor. They have social status and inherited assets, but very little actual liquidity or growth potential. Their manufacturing business has been declining for years, and they're basically living off investments in property they inherited rather than anything they've built themselves. This information was revelation. I had been intimidated by their social position, their obvious comfort with wealth, their certainty about their place in the city's hierarchy. But Theodore was showing me that their actual financial position was far more precarious than their lifestyle suggested. James's mother can afford to be a member of Pinehurst, Theodore continued, but she probably can't afford to be a significant donor. She can maintain her social position, but she can't expand her influence. She can exclude people from her world, but she can't build anything new. As these truths settled in, I felt my perspective shifting fundamentally. The people who had rejected me weren't the powerful establishment figures I had imagined them to be. They were people clinging to diminishing relevance, using exclusion and social hierarchy to maintain the illusion of importance while the real centers of power in the city shifted around them. The transformation in my thinking was accompanied by new opportunities that Theodore helped me recognize. A major development project was being planned for the downtown area, one that would require significant infrastructure improvements and would dramatically increase property values in several neighborhoods where I already owned buildings. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.